private fusion companies have now raised $4.7 billion. You mentioned Bill Gates and some others. Can you just talk about why are they so confident about the prospects of commercial fusion energy? And then specifically, what types of metrics have these investors established to assess a company's performance?
The two big headline metrics are, can you push a button and make more power out from the plasma than what went in? Break even energy. Above that, there's burning plasma, which burning plasma is also very important scientifically, maybe not big headline. The next headline is electricity on the grid. And the decadal plan actually breaks that out and says that that's on the goal, electricity on the grid. And the national academies also say those are the two big phases of a pilot plant, net energy, power on the grid. And so they're looking to see that. But of course, they need to see intermediate milestones before then to know that we are on track. And so they're tracking not just what the private companies are doing, but what the labs at JET and others are doing as well to indicate, are we on track? Key thing is time. If we wait, we lose. And that's because the market window is really, really sensitive on time.
Thank you. Dr. Su, in your testimony, I was struck by the fact that when you talked about fusion research has profound impacts for national security. How's the department protecting fusion research from Russia and from China? I saw yesterday that Putin and Xi were going to meet together.
Thank you, Senator. It's a very important question. Our cross-cut team, in fact, has members on it from NNSA, especially, and we want to tackle this question more seriously. Furthermore, we're also working with the White House. They're looking into offering cybersecurity training and resources for our private fusion industry. Those are starts, but we know we have to pay careful attention.
Okay. So Dr. Luce, as I see Russia and China being bad actors along the way, should they be allowed to continue participating in international fusion projects?
So historically, fusion has been a bridge to have conversations with various political entities with which we don't necessarily share the same worldview. This goes back to Khrushchev visiting the UK in 1957. There is no weaponization potential for magnetic confinement fusion, and for the ITER agreement itself, it is a treaty-level agreement. We've chosen to work together, and I think it's a realization both of the good investment. They get everything from a small amount, but also from a common need. If we can reduce one source of friction among us, this is a plus.
Dr. Cowley, if I could ask you, last week Newsweek published an article highlighting how South Korea researchers sustained a stable fusion reaction for 30 seconds. Who are America's main competitors right now in fusion research?
Well, the biggest investment's clearly coming from China. And China has a plan to get a pilot plant together on a slightly accelerated timescale, even compared to ours. And interestingly, they just announced a second machine to try and rival what the Commonwealth Fusion are doing, and go that route, which is the more compact route. They're pouring in dollars. And if you ask what a global competitor is, certainly China. The other one is obviously Europe and the UK. I should not talk too much about the UK, but but there is a plan in the UK to push forward the spherical tokamak concept, which is what the machine at Princeton is innovating on, towards a reactor on a similar timescale to the end of the 2030s that we're talking about. I think China is looking at us and trying to copy the different steps that we're taking. And it's very interesting that they have made a step to copy what Commonwealth Fusion systems are doing. Whether they'll move as fast as the private sector in the US, I have my doubts. But
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So, Dr. Luce, we've heard today that the private sector has been making great progress in conjunction with the public sector writ large. But that ITER is progressing slowly and increasing in cost. So if I had to defend continued investment in ITER in 30 seconds, what would be the elevator speech that would allow me to defend the continued investment when it seems as if the private is racing ahead?
So 2 key points. For an investment of around 10%, you get 100%. So your risk exposure is less in terms of cost. So even if it...
You lost me there. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds if you don't mind, so go ahead.
So the model for the ITER cost is that, for example, the U.S. pays 9% of the construction, 13% of operations. They get 100% of the outcome.
Got it.
So if they were to do that themselves, they would have to pay 100%. So it's a prudent investment. The second thing is it is already in progress. So you have learned already lessons that need to be integrated into things going in parallel. As we said before, that it's largely a scientific removal of doubt and beginning the technology journey. Other places, like Dr. Munkmark said, are focusing on the technology journey. This is where industry does it the best. In terms of public-private, I would have an observation. The one place where the U.S. government has worked on technology development is national security. To me, it's clear that energy security is national security.
I accept that. Now, but going back to, establishing certainty, it seems like there's $4.7 billion in private investment, which seems to be pretty assured. So I'm just making that observation. Dr. Mumgaard, you point out kind of how NASA used to be the one that sent I think it was your testimony, all the rockets into space, and now we rely upon privates to do it. They do it faster and cheaper. And it was clear in context, you were kind of drawing an analogy here. Knowing that you have to probably be a little diplomatic, but frankly, I hope you're not. How would you give a 30-second speech in response to the question which I ask?
Yeah. Just because we have Boeing doesn't mean we stop building wind tunnels in the public program. But you have to keep innovating on the science. You have to keep pushing that forward. And if we're right and we build a giant fusion industry, something like ITER makes a whole lot of sense, right? Because it's going to continue to be a center of excellence to try new things that are too risky for the private programs to try. And if we're right, and we have a commercial fusion industry, that allows the public program to focus on the next step. And so when NASA, no longer goes to low Earth orbit, instead has commercial entities do that, that frees NASA to go and do the really cool stuff, like go to Europa, because they don't have the baggage of running a technology and industry. And so this is analogous here, where we're trying to build on the science.
I get your point. Dr. Hsu and Dr. Callie, y'all are kind of disinterested, in my mind at least. I'm going to let y'all arbitrate. Okay. Now, I don't know the capabilities of what ITER has, because I have a sense that it's trying to prove in concept the process by which you would do this. It's going to show that you can have sustained increase of temperature to a sufficient degree that this reaction can occur. But when you're putting that much investment into hard structures, you can't really say, well, now we want to do this. Way back when I was taking biochemistry and chemistry, we would say, oh, now we want to make this reaction, not that. And we would rearrange a few things, and boom, we were blowing up the lab with another way. This is going to be billions sunk into capital projects. And it's hard for me to think that you're going to be able to, let's kind of rearrange everything and see how it works differently. So if Dr. Mumgaard is suggesting that there's going to be a basic level of pushing the ball forward on science, how much flexibility will this built infrastructure give to try different things? Dr. Callie, you're outside the government, so I'm going to ask you first, okay? So,
I think there's a key thing that ITER's going to do, which is it's an experiment. So they're going to study what's going on inside the reaction. When Commonwealth Fusion or one of the other private companies actually demonstrates fusion, they're going to move forward and try and make electricity. But one of the things that has got us to where we are is by understanding the science of containment of the 100 million degree plasmas.
isn't that the baseline of what they're attempting to do? And once that's established, you've established.
No, because in fact, so we contain it with magnetic fields that push it in and take it off the walls. And there's turbulence that brings the heat from the middle to the outside. And if we can reduce that turbulence, we can make the whole system smaller. And in fact, the pound for pound, the highest performing experiment in the world is really General Atomics D3D in San Diego. They have managed to reduce the turbulence to much smaller levels than any of the other machines in the world. And that's by understanding what's going on. And therefore, they get higher performance. And in the end, it's going to be a question of, is the performance good enough to make the electricity cheap enough? And we don't know the answer to that yet.
And Mr. Chairman, could I ask Dr. Hsu just to weigh in if he has anything to add?
Absolutely.
Dr. Hsu?
Thank you, Senator. Well, I won't repeat what's been said, but I'll add a few points. I think the international engagements aspect of ITER have a lot of spillover of benefits, and we'd be happy to go into those a bit more, maybe in written responses in the interest of time. Maybe I'll just mention one, international coordination on things like regulatory is very important. If the U.S. wants to be export fusion as a global product, for example. I also want to point to Office of Nuclear Energy example. We've deployed nuclear energy for decades and decades, but we still have need for test reactors and other facilities to continue optimizing the industry. So that's one example where ITER could continue to help, regardless of the private sector timescale. And finally, at this very moment, I sincerely hope Dr. Mumgard proves this wrong, but ITER is the surest path to a burning plasma at this point in time. And of course, we all should continue to reassess based on global developments in fusion development.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you very much. Now we have Senator Hickenlooper.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you all for your time, your commitment, and all the work you're doing. It is, and the chair has said this before. What you're doing has the direct potential to change life on Earth as we know it, and so many of the challenges we face. I want to start with Dr. Mumgard. Leading fusion companies and efforts, the pathways of progress are getting millions of dollars in investment. Very exciting for the industry. However, there are many smaller companies just starting up, like you were a few years ago, that are, we have several of them in Colorado, of course. The newer companies are smaller, don't have the track record, attract less funding and attention. They struggle to get any federal dollars because of the hurdles like high cost, share requirements, and milestone-based funding. What should we be thinking about to try and lower barriers and direct capital towards the innovative, the nascent fusion companies?
Yeah, great question. We think of it as a ladder. So you have at one level grants like ARPA-E, which are how most of these companies get started. That's a grant. But then you also have things like, well, if you had access so that the science that running supercomputer time that you couldn't afford to do as a small company, you get access not just to stuff, but to people's minds. So lowering the barrier to collaboration between the labs and the companies. And then that means you get results. And those results mean that maybe you're in an innovation program by Tech to Market from DOE to help find connections to people that might invest. And so you get up and up in the ladder. And the big scale, maybe it's a milestone program, but after that, maybe it's the tax incentives and subsidies that we do for any energy system. So it's important that we have a ladder that doesn't have gaps. And that means it has to be a holistic look at it.
Great, and I could not agree more, and that's part of our job, but we need your input to make sure we do that properly, that they're not missing rungs, gaps that get in the way. Dr. Luce, let me turn to you. It is always great to see a lasting international collaborative effort. It's so important for so many reasons, but especially for such an important energy innovation. At the same time, it is a global race, which obviously will at some point hopefully have important energy security consequences. Some of the major players in the fusion space, like the United Kingdom and Canada, do not participate in ITER. And again, as we've seen with Dr. Cawley, that British accent does create a sense of real knowing. All the movies we've seen about these frontiers, they have an advantage that we should recognize. How do we balance the collaboration and competition to ensure that the U.S. stays ahead of the curve, but also works together with our allies to make progress on fusion?
Well, I think you've almost answered your own question, that engagement is essential. If you're engaged with what the world is doing, then your investments will return more because you participate and then you choose what you can do best or what you want to focus on, and that enhances the investment, basically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just as a follow-up, any of you can answer, what are some of the things we should be learning from other countries? Not necessarily about a specific scientific innovation, but process or approach. If there's something that you should be sharing with the Senate. But you can look at it like Jeopardy, you just push the button and say, me.
Well, one of the reasons why ITER is in France is because it has a unique nuclear regulatory regime that's demonstration-based. So this has challenges in terms of certainty for industry if they're using a proven technology, but it allows for innovation. So there's room for consideration of how to do regulation that enables innovation.
Got it. I like that. Yeah. Dr. Mumford?
The UK, so the UK is in the middle of executing a very good transition from focusing on plasma science to enabling technology development at the UK AEA and building test stands that other people are going to come use. And they've grown an entire technology cohort of people in doing so. So in terms of the pivot, the UK has done a very good job.
Interesting. Really good. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to make that point, actually, but but again, so is China, and China is putting a lot of money into the technology aspects, the materials, how to handle the fuel cycle. That's processing the fuels and bringing them in, the turning neutrons into electricity. This is something the U.S. program has put aside for a period of time and needs to really focus back on. And the decadal plan and the national academies have all focused on saying, if we're serious about electricity, that's what we've got to do. And the Europeans are doing it, the British are doing it very well, and the Chinese are doing it.
Great. Perfect. Thank you very much. Dr. Sue, anything?
Just to hammer that point, what I said in my opening remarks is that we are ready for an energy development mission for fusion, and that requires a fundamentally different strategy.
Right. No, point well taken. Thank you all. I yield back to the chair.
Thanks, Senator. Thank you. Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for being here today. So, in a nutshell for each of you, why fusion? I mean, we went the nuclear fission route, obviously not only in weapons, but then utilizing it for energy. That seemed to have fallen into disfavor for a variety of reasons. Now, there's some effort, I think, to return to it. And then I also remember the super collider days back in Texas, and I mean, we were putting billions into that back when billions was a lot of money, right? And that didn't seem to actually happen. So is this really going to happen? And why do you think so, and why should it, in layman's terms now? So that the public actually goes, gosh, we want that, right? Because that's a big part of any of this, particularly with the massive investment that's required. So I don't know, Dr. Chu, if you want to start.
Sure, thank you. It's always good to ask the questions right from the basics, so I appreciate that. I think a couple of things. One is fusion has a lot of implications for not only energy security, but national security and global leadership. So it is a race for future global leadership. That's one point. Second point is energy abundance. We will need a lot of carbon-free primary energy going forward for multiple reasons. And we hope we can get there. And fusion is kind of the ideal way to do it. It is energy, it's dense in energy, the fuel is theoretically limitless, and it can be deployed anywhere. You don't rely on weather or climate, et cetera. And so there are many reasons why it would be good to have in our back pocket as something for civilization. I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
At a PCAST hearing around December, Jesse Jenkins, my colleague from Princeton, talked about what was missing in the suite of technologies in order to decarbonize America's supply. This is Net Zero America project that he leads from Princeton. And the key thing that's missing is what is now termed the firm energy sources. These are ones you can turn on when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and you can supply energy in all kinds of places. And his point was that we don't have enough options in that space. At this point, they're basing it on doing extension of nuclear and using carbon capture and storage. And both of those have, at this point, unless we develop advanced nuclear, they have finite lifetimes. Decades possibly they can be used for, and then we'll have used up their potential. And therefore, we have to have a firm energy source that goes into that space, and that's fusion.
This contains fusion fuel. This makes it easy. If we use deuterium tritium, everybody has this. It's safe. Our byproduct is helium. It's an inert gas. The reactor has in it 1 gram of fuel at any time. It can't run away. We've demonstrated scientific understanding to manipulate, as Steve has said, to optimize. Where we need the next frontier is technology. And that's where the mystery is, and that's where the investment needs to be. We don't have the same predictive capability for metals, for other things that we have for the plasma physics, which is tremendously hard science, but we've really attacked it, and we've largely solved that problem. We have to show that, but it's solved. Now we need to address the technology.
In terms of layman, I go to like the most layman thing I can think of. Fusion is the energy source. It's in all the science fiction. It's in all the comic books. Why? And it's because it's a fundamentally different relationship between humanity and energy, because it's energy without fuel, without consumption. It is if you have a machine, you have energy. Full stop. Forever. No one can take it away from you. No one can stop you from doing it. You have energy. Not only do you have energy that is 99.999999 the energy of the universe. We just saw James Webb. That was a very fancy camera in space to take picture of fusion power plants, ancient ones. It is the thing of the stars. So it's like a very fundamental difference. And it manifests itself in all these different practical ways we talk about of energy security, but it is like very different.
Are we really going to get there? Is this, the fuel of the future and always will be? You mentioned General Atomics. I do a lot of work with General Atomics. I was intrigued when you said they have been doing some really good work. I think they're really, good about actually getting a result. They have to be. They're private sector and so forth. So they don't have limitless funding, even on the scale of some of the really big companies. So if you'll indulge me for just a minute, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
And maybe I'll come back to you, Professor Cowley. Why is it not always going to be the future of the fuel of the future? Why are we actually going to get there, and when? And if you want to work in a little bit on GA, that would be good. What they're doing, because it sounded like you thought they were actually getting to something.
Yeah, they've done some beautiful experiments at GA that have reduced the loss of heat from the experiment so that you can therefore make the experiment smaller and in the future make fusion reactors smaller. But the reason I'm actually optimistic about fusion is we've actually done some. All right, we've actually made the fusion reaction happen, and last year was a record-breaking year. The experiment at Lawrence Livermore Lab actually got a fusion burn. Right? So we know that fusion is possible. We now have to apply all the power of the private sector in order to drive down the cost so that it's then at a cost that the consumer wants to pay.
So it is technologically possible, maybe not yet commercially viable. I mean, you actually can do it.
That's a good way to say it. I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.